practice. Okay, that's fine. So yeah, how we can study objects and see what they can tell us actually about religious practice, cult practice. So we are going to look at two types of object today. We are going to look at the menat, which we can see these ladies shaking here, and we can we're going to have a look at the sistra. We will be returning to this tomb scene later. This is really just so that we can actually visualize how these objects are used. The menat, often called a menat necklace, we can see this illustration shows quite clearly that these are ritual instruments. They are held, they are shaken, and then the bead portion here will make a noise. Both of these objects we can think of as percussion instruments. So it's the noise really that is important here. This is probably one of the best preserved menats that we have from ancient Egypt, actually found by the Metropolitan Museum's excavations at Melkata, which is Amenhotep III's palace that he created for the celebration of his Heb-Seb, his jubilee. But this was found in a private house. Fantastic to think that this might have been used in ceremonies in the reign of Amenhotep III. So we can imagine this portion here being held and the beady section here making a rustling percussion-y type of noise. Without a doubt, the colour is significant here. We've got these beautiful faience beads, and faience we can think of really as imitating turquoise. Turquoise was a colour and a stone which was associated very much with the goddess Hathor. One of her epithets is mistress of Meftkat, and Meftkat is turquoise. It might be the colour or it could be the particular stone. I think it's probably more important the colour, this bluey green that the Egyptians called waj, which symbolises rebirth and renewal. So how and why were these instruments used as percussion? Really, we need to go back into an Old Kingdom tomb scene. This is an incredibly important image, and it's showing us the association of the goddess Hathor with papyrus and papyrus rustling. If we have a look at the line drawing, we can see this is the queen here, Hetty-Heres, and this is her daughter, Mesenank. And they are, we can see quite graphically here, they are, the text tells us they are pulling or shaking papyrus for Hathor. So we've got the papyrus marshes here. So I always think of Hathor here in her bovine form. She's a cow in the marshes. And the ladies are making this rustling noise to try and coax her out of the marshes, perhaps to try and appease her, to try and soothe her. But it is really telling that from this 4th dynasty tomb, we've got this clear link with the goddess and papyri, and this concept of shaking or rattling the papyrus as a way of venerating or appeasing the goddess. This, of course, is an extremely elite image. Hetty-Heres is the daughter of the king. She's the daughter of Khufu. So we can really see that this forms much of the basis of the veneration of Hathor at later times. And if we think this beautiful example of a menat, this really illustrates the association of the menat with Hathor. We can see we have multiple representations of her. We've got a beautiful anthropoid depiction. We have her here in her bovine form, again in the marshes. It's been suggested that this part of the menat we can think of as almost representing a womb, and we have images here which are related to the birth and the protection of Horus, so the divine child. But this example is resplendent in imagery. We have what we can think of here as a Hathor fetish. This really is a representation of a sistrum. We can see we have a naxos here and a beautiful Hathor head and a handle. And this is resting on an emblem here for Neb, which means gold. And this again is an epithet of Hathor. She is referred to as the golden one. So we can think of her as shining, associated with the solar, as not tarnishing. So this beautiful menat, this illustrates that this part of the instrument is really associated with the female body and the regenerative and fertile aspects of the female body. And it's been suggested by scholars, a French scholar called Paul Barrett, that the menat necklace, well, the menat counterpose, is a similar shape to so-called paddle dolls. These wooden figurines, these were found in Middle Kingdom Egypt, so say from about 2000 BC. They're found in tombs, predominantly in tombs around Deir el-Bahari, so around Thebes. And the very interesting aspect of these is that they are found in multiple groups. So tombs will often have 5 or 6, 10. There's even one tomb which has 23 of these in. And in that particular tomb, they're associated with 2 coffins. One has a group of 5, and the other has a group of 18. So we find these in burials in multiples. And again, we have the stylized and abstracted female form. But we have really a great emphasis on fertility, and we can perhaps see that the round end here as being similar to this portion of the menat, which we can think of as symbolizing the womb. It's quite interesting. Ellen Morris wrote a very good paper about paddle dolls and performance, and she believed that these paddle dolls were actually representing dancers. And I know that may seem strange because they have no legs, but the Egyptians depict in an abstracted form the key elements. And the key elements are the fertility of this figure, the pubic region, and the hair. And of course, the hair has been created using these mud beads, which of course, if rattled, would make a very similar noise to the menat necklace. But the suggestion is that these figurines, which emphasize their genitalia, they are really a reference to the one of the myths of Hathor, which is the contendings of Horus and Seth. And in this myth, Ra, the sun god, is aged, he's tired, and Hathor tries to revitalize him as his daughter. So to do this, she reveals her genitalia. And Ra laughs and he's rejuvenated. So this concept of the female body is seen to have this invigorating effect. So the possibility is that these figures represent dancers. The dancers are doing backflips. As they do backflips, they reveal their genitals. And these dances very well might have been carried out at temples for the king, so Montuhotep II. And then these figurines are created by craftsmen associated with his court, and they are given to people that might have been part of these festivals. They are taken to the tomb so that they will act in a similar way for the tomb owner. So they will invigorate the tomb owner in the afterlife, as the dancers invigorated Montuhotep in life. So the suggestion is that the counterpose is similar in shape, and in many respects in its concepts, that this regenerative female body to the paddle doll. And we can see when we look at these votives, these are wooden models of counterposes. And these were left at Deir al-Bari. They were left as gifts to Hathor. And we can see that they look very similar to both the paddle doll and the more elaborate counterpose. So we again can think that these are gifts to Hathor to appease her, in the hope that she will give you a long and a good life. So we see some quite beautifully decorated paddle dolls, and if we think of the dress on them here, this is actually very similar to how we see dancers depicted in Middle Kingdom tombs. So we can really think that the female form is very much seen to have this regenerative capacity, particularly in a ritual context, in the sense that we have action, we have religious action being carried out. So if we're back to our sistra, our menats, if we're trying to think about how they are used, there is a wonderful reference in the tale of Sinaway, which is a Middle Kingdom text, and in the text, Sinaway is a courtier, and he has fled Egypt due to the death of Amenemhat I, and he settles in Canaan, and he marries, and he has a successful life, but in his heart he longs to come back to Egypt, and then he is sent an invitation by Samrusaret I to come back to court, and what we have here is a description of his reception when he comes back to court, and we're talking about the royal children here. They brought with them their necklaces, their rattles, and their sistra, and they presented them to his majesty. Your hands upon this beauty, enduring king, these insignia of the Lady of Heaven. May the golden one give life to your nostrils, the Lady of Stars enfold you. So this is all references to Hathor, the golden one, and Lady of Heaven. She's often called the Lady of the Sky, the Mistress of the Sky, the Mistress of Heaven. So Sinaway, when he is welcomed back in court, the royal children are using these instruments, their sistra and their menats, and it suggested that they might be pacifying the king in the same way as Ra is pacified, as obviously the king has to welcome back Sinaway from his journey and his life really in the Canaan. When we get to the Middle Kingdom, so about 2000 BC, we start to see tomb scenes where we see the instruments, the menat and the sistra, often used together. And we can really start to imagine them as part of objects of cult practice. This tomb is in Mia, and Mia, the necropolis, is very much associated with the goddess Hathor. The tomb itself, we have what we could think of as quite typical funerary scenes here. The tomb owner and his wife in front of a table of offerings. But we have a whole series of the superintendent of the temple with dancers. And we can see we have the shaking of sistra and menats. And the text talks, is really asking Hathor that she may prolong my life. The text suggests that the rituals, the religious practice being depicted here, this might be festivals that took place in the tomb owner's life, festivals to Hathor, because Mia, the necropolis, it is, and the whole area is sacred to Hathor. So we might be seeing here festivals to Hathor. The imagery is beautiful because we can see we have a Hathor-headed sistrum, a naxos sistrum. These are the earliest sorts of sistra that we see, and we can see the shaking of the menat necklace. So we can imagine that this rustling noise here. And in the pardon me. Sorry. So in the divine, the royal realm, in the New Kingdom tombs, we do see Hathor very often offering the sistra to the deceased king. This is one of the most beautiful and elaborate images that we have of this. This, of course, is from the tomb of Seti, but now it is in the Louvre. And we can see the closeness between the goddess and the king. They're holding hands, and they are actually face to face. And many of the texts that talk about the sistra and the menat talk about worshipping face to face, worshipping your face, and that really is what we're seeing here. It's been suggested that this offering of the menat to the king, that this really is an equivalent of Hathor revealing her genitals to Ra. So it has this same this same regenerative capacity, and we can think really of the menat as radiating the power of the goddess. And at Abydos, we have this fantastic image where we see the king, Seti again, but here we have Sekhmet, and she is also offering the king the menat. But if we look closely at the image, we can see incorporated in the menat, we've got the symbol of the ankh, which means life, or to give life. So we can see really just how powerful these images are. The menat is predominantly associated with Hathor. The sistra is associated with Hathor, but is used in the cult of other deities. But the menat has strong Hathoric links. If we think that Sekhmet, we can think of as the more ferocious form of Hathor. If we think of the Eye of Ra, as told in the book of the Heavenly Cow, when Ra is cross with mankind, so he unleashes his daughter, the Eye of Ra, to slaughter mankind, and she does so with such vigor that after the first day he wants to rein her in. So to do this, he floods the earth with a red liquid, which she thinks is blood, but it is actually beer or wine. And in these tellings, it can either be Sekhmet or Hathor. But this is a fantastic image which shows how powerful these instruments are. This is a fantastic tomb scene, a Ramesside tomb, and we have a standard image of the deceased and his wife. Their son is here, and they are probably taking the journey to Abydos. But beneath, we have this quite amazing image. We can see we've got the menat counterpose here. Sorry, we've got the beaded necklace of the menat, but instead of the counterpose, we have the beetle. And if we think that the beetle can be symbolizing the god Capre, the god of the morning sun, but the word Capre is really based on the verb to come into being. So we can think about this again as very much as a regenerative image. This is a symbol of the sky here. So we can see that the counterpose is very much being associated with this, the morning sun coming into being. The text associated with this image is actually from the Book of the Dead, which of course is a papyri which was placed generally in the tombs to aid the afterlife of the deceased. But sometimes images, particularly in the Ramesside period, they are also included on tomb walls. And this spell is what we can think of as a transformation spell. A spell or a prayer, it's a recitation, it's something that is said. And these recitation texts, that they are about transforming into another being in the afterlife. And this text is so you can transform into any being. Fantastic image, which is really, again, showing these objects actually in action. This is on Tutankhamun's golden shrine. Those of us in the UK which were lucky enough to see the Saatchi exhibition before it was closed due to lockdown will remember the golden shrine. A stunning object, has a small pedestal in it, no statue, but a little pair of feet where a statue may or may not have been. But the important thing about the golden shrine is that the imagery all over it is really about the Queen Ankh-Sememun venerating Tutankhamun. And we can see here she has a naos sistrum and an incredibly elaborate menat. We can see the counterpose here, and it is Hathor headed. So we can really see how this instrument is associated with the goddess. And the hands here, they are again offering the ankh, this symbol of life. And it's been suggested that this image is really an Egyptian wordplay, really, about sexual activity. This is really quietly illustrating the sexual union between the king and the queen, which of course would give life. The word minute, which is how the Egyptians wrote the necklace, can also mean thighs or womb, and that of course would fit in beautifully with what we talked about before. The Egyptians love wordplay, that they are quite reticent about depicting sexual activity, but we have lots of puns. The word for pour is also the word to beget. So when we see scenes where a wife wife is pouring a drink for her husband, it also has sexual connotations. But this is a beautiful image. That all the images are very much about Ankh-Semamun venerating the king, and it's been suggested that the golden shrine might have been a gift from Ankh-Semamun to Tutankhamun. He's never referred to as an Osiris. He is very much a living king on the shrine. So back to the image that we started at, and we can see we have priestesses who are yielding their cultic instruments. There's three different types of priestesses. They're priestesses of Ammon, the Great Ennead, and Hathor. So these instruments are not solely used in the cult of Hathor. If we look, the scene continues. We also have male priests, and they have clappers. These again are percussion instruments, and really that would be another talk for another day. But we can see they also are wearing the menat necklaces. If we just have a look at the bigger picture, always useful to put the two scenes in context. This dancing, percussion, and the ladies yielding the menats and the sistra, this was all being carried out for the Tumona and his wife. They would have been depicted over here. This is quite a traditional banquet scene. So these images may be depicting ceremonies that took place in life. That this again might be religious ceremonies and festivals, but above we do have funerary images. We can just make out a foreleg of beef, a hess jar, and above this scene there is what we can think of as a menu card. There's a whole list of offerings, but this banquet might be what the Egyptians are hoping will happen at their tomb to keep their cult alive, or indeed it could be depicting festivals that took place in life. But this concept of dance and music making is very much in keeping with religious practice. And if we have a look at this beautiful counterpose, we can see once again we have this concept that we touched upon about the counterpose being this representation of a fertile body, a fertile female body, and the power that was seen to have in ancient Egypt. Because here we have Tahya, and he is being suckled by a lion-headed goddess, very possibly Basset. And the king is only depicted suckling on his birth, in the afterlife, or at his coronation. So this counterpose might have been made as a votive, or it might have been made as a funerary offering. But we can clearly see how we have the power of the female form. And below we have the two ladies. We have Nekbet and Wadjet, who are giving their protection to Horus, who is of course the representation of the king on earth. So the concept and the power of the menat, we see amulets created, and we often find this with objects that they lose their functionality, and that the object itself becomes important. If we think Tutankhamun, underneath his head there was a tiny headrest about this big, which is just an amulet of a headrest. And this is what we have here, a menat just over 2 centimeters. This is just an amulet. but it shows how important the concept of the menat, the counterpose is, and it very probably took on these concepts of the regenerative female body and the association with Hathor. We do see lion-headed goddesses associated with the menat. This could be Sekhmet, who we've already met. It could be Tefnut, or it could be Basset. All of these goddesses are sometimes described as the Eye of Ra, and they also relate to the myth of the distant goddess, and again that is Ra, and his daughter is cross with him, so she travels very probably to Nubia, and then depending on which telling of the myth we have, either Hoth or sometimes Shu has to placate her, and they bring her back. But this shows how important she's seen the Eye of Ra. When she is missing, Ra feels powerless, and he needs her back. She can take any of these lion-headed goddesses. So we see at Dendera some fantastic images which really show how the menat is seen as a personification of Hathor. We have a wonderful image here. We have the king, sadly unnamed, and he is making an offering to Hathor. But behind her, we have her in human form, but we have her personified as the menat. And at the temple, she is often referred to as the menat. So we are left in no doubt that Hathor is the personification of the menat. This is her child Ihe, who we will meet at a later form. She is wearing a crown which has double ostrich feathers, and at Dendera, when she is personified as the menat, she does sometimes wear this crown. And again, we've got these beautiful ankh symbols, so we can see the life-giving power of the necklace. So at Dendera, there are a series of chapels around the bark shrine. This is the bark shrine, the most sacred part of the temple. Whole series of chapels around this, one of which 21 is dedicated to the menat. In addition to shrines around the bark shrine, there are also a whole series of crypts below the shrine. Greco-Roman temples are particularly interesting in the sense that they have crypts and that they have chapels on the roof, so that they have this solar and this subterranean space of worship. And this is an image from one of the crypts. The crypts will have been used to store sacred objects. Sadly, that they are all found empty. But if we just have a look at this really fantastic image here, we can see Hathor. She is being associated with Isis here, because we do have the throne depicted on her head. We do see the growing importance of Isis in the later time periods, and we have this beautiful connection between the menat and and the sistra, all naxos headed sistra here. And we've also have the image of the Agnes, which is this counterpose, which we'll see and talk about later. This also becomes a symbol in its own right. But we can see we've got this beautiful image of a bark with the sun. So we can think about again the life-giving qualities of the menat. It's also been noted that when Hathor is associated with Isis, with the menat, that the menat may be symbolizing the testicles of Seth, in the sense that they have been cut off, and he has been emasculated, and therefore he loses his power. Much of Seth's power is indeed sexual power and energy. And if we think in the contendings of Horus and Seth, Seth does indeed sexually assault Horus. So part of Seth's energy is sexual power. So if his testicles are removed, he is in some way, his power is lessened. So the menat then really can be seen to have I can never say this. It can be seen to be warding off evil, and in that way, it is containing Seth. So this connotation is very, very interesting, because we can then think that the menat in some instances is celebrating the victory of Horus over Seth, which makes it an incredibly powerful object. This is a text from the Pear Web, which is the chapel at Dendra, immediately behind the Bark Shrine. We've just looked at where the Bark Shrine is. So the chapel that is at the very rear of the temple, on the main axes, where Hathor is referred to as the powerful lady who fights for her brother, who protects his protection against his enemies. And this is about the defeat of Seth. And we see this repeated in several texts at Dendra. Here we have an unnamed king offering a menat, and the text tells us, "He who fails at his time, Seth, he does not exist." That's actually quite a powerful text. To say Seth does not exist, it suggests his annihilation. And it's the vindication of Horus. So we can see that the menat has many levels of meaning, and it is very much an object which is offered to Hathor. We can see we have a whole list, a whole series of objects of dedications to the goddess. We have both types of sistra, which we will talk about, the naxos and the hooped, in addition to two menat necklaces. So these are all gifts which are appropriate to give to the goddess. The menat very much is also seen as a protector of the king. We saw that briefly in the image of Takata. But if we just think about this fantastic cow statue, here it is, which was created by Thutmose III and placed in a chapel inside the hillside at Deir el-Bahri, next to the temple of Montuhotep II and near Thutmose III's temple of millions of years. Beautiful statue of Hathor, who is protecting his son Amenhotep II. But if we look at the image painted on the shrine walls, we can see that protection is brought about by placing him under the menat necklace. So we can see that the menat here is radiating protection. So it's a giver of life, but it is also a protector of the king. So we will move on now and look at the sistra. We have seen multiple examples where the objects are used together, but at some point I needed to make a division in our exploration of them. And the earliest type of sistra is the naxos. And we can think about this as representing a shrine, almost as a small sanctuary, perhaps representing the sanctuary where the god would reside. This then made me think, does this suggest that the music itself is being thought of as divine? We can see we often have the protection of a uraeus, and we have many Hathor-headed examples. This is a hooped sistra, which we don't really see until the 18th dynasty, but we have textual references to them earlier. But we see that the naxos type first, and this is the earliest example that I know of, and it is a fantastic object. It is royal, it's dedicated to Teti, but if we just look at the handle, we have a papyrus stalk, and this is the naxos. We'll come back to this, but there are holes here where the bronze rods would have passed through. So when shaken, this would have made a similar tinkling noise. But if we think about what we've talked about, shaking the papyri, you are indeed shaking the papyri for Hathor when you use this instrument. It is an absolute joy. It is bringing into action that concept of shaking and rattling the papyrus for Hathor. We have a falcon on top, and if we think Hathor means the house or the domain of Horus, and we have the protection of a cobra here. It is really quite a powerful object. And if we have a look at this tomb scene, this is the tomb from Mia, where we were looking at the superintendents of the temple dancers. But if we look closely at this image of his sistra, we can see we have a bunch of papyri. The handle is made up of 3 papyri stalks. Then we have a naxos, and we have 2 falcons here. So once again, we've got this concept of shaking the papyri for Hathor. The word for sistra, there are a couple that the ancient Egyptians use, but one of which it really almost epitomizes the sound, sechet, which we can imagine almost symbolizing the vocalization of this noise, this tinkering noise. The Egyptians also use the word secum for the sistrum, and that can also mean power and powerful, which again that tells us very much about their concept of this object. We do have many examples of these beautiful Hathor-headed sistra, and we can see once again the rods are missing here. The text talks about jubilation, making music, and jubilation. It is suggested that the noise that would have been produced by this would not really have been great. So in many respects, that it might have more of a symbolic gesture than an actual sound gesture. We see the hooped sistra from about the 18th dynasty, and of course we can think that this is a very similar shape to the ankh, this concept of life or to give life. And we have these beautiful Hathor, or perhaps bat-headed instruments, and we'll consider the possibility that they may represent bat, or at least show the synchronization of Hathor and the goddess Bat shortly. This example is fantastic. Either side, we have representations of the goddess Meret, who is not seen that often. She is a goddess of music and celebration. And she's in this beautiful posture of adoration here. So perhaps she's adoring the music, but she's also associated with cosmic order, with balance and with harmony. So perhaps that's suggesting that this music and this veneration of the goddess is essential for cosmic harmony. Sometimes she's associated with goddesses of the East and the West. And again, we've got the rearing cobra here as a protector. Now, I said that the menat is very much associated with Hathor. We do see that the sistra used in the veneration of other gods. Quite tellingly and fascinatingly, we see the sistra very often in the worship of the atom. We can see here this boundary stela from Amarna. We have Akhenaten and Nefertiti giving veneration to the disc, to the atom, and they are followed by two princesses. And if we look, they are shaking the sistra, but the sistra does indeed appear to be Hathor-headed, which is really quite fantastic. This fragment, this would have been Nefertiti. We can see she is the great royal wife, and she is followed by two sistra, who, although we can't see the facial features, they do appear tantalizingly to be Hathor-headed. As I said, we don't see the menat in the Amarna time period, but we do see the sistra. There were two sistra found also in the tomb of Tutankhamun. They do not have any deities depicted on them. They are simply a hoop sistra, and they were found on top of the cow couch in the antechamber. But if we just have a little look at this text, this is found in one of the crypts at Dendra. We can see how the menat and the sistra were used together in the worship of the goddess. We beat, this is a bad translation, it should be a tambra. The ancient Egyptians did not have tambourines. Think of a tambra as a drum. We beat the tambra for your car. We dance to please your majesty. We lift you up to the sky because you are the mistress of the secum, the menat necklace and the sistrum. The mistress who makes music, whose car makes music. So we can see that the sistrum and the menat were used in collaboration for the worship of particularly Hathor. And this is one of the images from the crypts at Dendra. And we can see both the hooped sistra and the naxos sistra are used. So it isn't the case that when we get the development of the naxos, when we get the development of the hooped sistra, the naxos falls out of fashion. That isn't the case. Both of them are used, but we do get particular texts which refer to the different types of sistra. And this is what I was talking about before with Seti and Hathor. We grasp the rattle sistrum and we play them before your beautiful face. This concept of worshipping it before the face is seen to be very important. We have some beautiful images of the god Ihe, who is seen to be the child of Hathor, the child of Hathor of Dendra and Horus of Edfu, an incredibly powerful parentage. And we can see he is shaking this beautiful naxos sistrum. This was also found in the tomb of Tutankhamun, in one of the blackened shrines, one of the statues wrapped in linen. There was 35 of them in total, and they are all inscribed, beloved of. So the king is beloved of. He will be beloved of Ihe here. Carter actually believed that this statue represented Tutankhamun as the child Horus, but it is much more likely that it is Ihe. His name means that the sistrum player. Occasionally he's depicted as a calf in relation to Hathor in a bovine form, but more often than not he is a child with a sidelock of youth playing the sistrum. And he's seen really to be an intermediary. He's seen that he will intercede with Hathor for the dedicatee. And in the Greco-Roman temples, when the king is making an offering, it's suggested that he is trying to depict himself as Ihe. We can see here he has both the sistrum and the menat. At Edfu, we can see we have a series of priests who are moving upwards towards the roof. As I said, Greco-Roman temples have this fantastic dual focus where ceremonies would be carried out on the roof. And we can see we have both the naxos and the hooped sistra. We don't tend to see priests involved in religious activity in temples until the Greco-Roman period, because we have to remember that in the Egyptian mindset, the king is the head of every temple, and he is the high priest of every temple. So that the priests who officiate take the role of the king. So it's only really in Greco-Roman temples that we start to see religious activity using cultic instruments. Previously, we have to look at tombs to see this, which is what we've done. We've looked at the tombs at Myr and at Thebes. We have some fantastic images of Greco-Roman pharaohs offering to Hathor and to Ihe. If we just look at what Trajan is offering, we have the naxos sistrum, but here we have a fantastic image of a sistrum with the 3 papyrus umbels, the naxos, and the 2 falcons. So again, this is very similar and harking back to the sistrum we saw of Teti, right back to the Old Kingdom. But this is making concrete this shaking the papyrus for Hathor. And we have really the sistrum is used in these offerings, and really it's a reciprocal series of offerings. The king is offering the sistra. Ihe is here acting as an intermediary, and the king is also seeking to become Ihe. So the king is offering the sistra, and Hathor is giving the king beer and repeat drunkenness and joy without stopping. And Hathor, of course, is called the mistress of drunkenness, and that refers back to the myth that we talked about before, where her father Ra floods the earth with beer or wine. And again, Ihe here, he is also offering a falcon-headed sistra. I did say we would briefly talk about the concept of how the sistra might be representing the goddess Bat, or at least the synchronization of Bat and Hathor. Bat is an ancient deity. We see her from the early dynastic until about the 11th dynasty as an independent deity. This is a representation of her on a standard. I always think she looks like a jester, but the pyramid text refers to her as Bat with her two faces. And this is really what we see on the sistra. We have these two representations, but Hathor is similarly referred to, and we often have masks of Hathor, small faience offerings, which show the two faces of her, and that might be showing her dual nature, her more quiet nature and her ferocious nature. So these sistra could be also venerating the god Bat, or they are referencing the synchronization of Bat with Hathor. This beautiful triad from Menkaura's chapel shows Hathor and Bat while they are both distinct. Hathor is being represented as a national goddess, while Bat is being represented as a regional goddess. By about the 11th dynasty, Hathor has really taken on the roles of Bat, and we don't see her very often. In later time periods, the sistras become much more complex. They take on a whole variety of additional emblems. We can see we have rearing cobras here and here. And this we can think of really as showing an aegeus, which these type of objects symbolizing a collar, sometimes Hathor-headed, sometimes lion-headed. These become objects and amulets in their own right, but we can clearly see them included in the sistra from a later time period. The later time period sistra incorporate more deities. We can see we've got the god Bes here. Bes, of course, was a protector of women and children, but he was also seen to ward away evil. This is a fantastic piece because both Bes and Hathor are some of the few deities which are shown frontally, and we can think of them being shown frontally as they are speaking directly to the viewer. So we can think of as Bes as warding away evil, but that links in to the concept that these objects have multiple layers of meaning. We saw that the menat could also be warding off evil, in the sense that it is illustrating the victory of Horus over Seth. We also have a cat depicted here, which could be suggesting the goddess Basset. Basset, we will talk about in a moment. The sistra do carry on being produced in the Roman world as they become associated with the cult of Isis. This is a very late period, 1st to 2nd century AD, and it has lost much of its Hathoric association. The rods are duck-headed, while in pharaonic Egypt they would be cobra-headed. But here we do have a beautiful image which is very similar to how we see the goddess Basset. Basset is another of these goddesses that can take lion form, but she is from the later period very often shown in a more domesticated manner, as a cat with her kittens, very much associated with fertility and healing, actually. So we can think perhaps we've got the incorporation of Basset here with the sistra. So I am going to end here. Hopefully you can appreciate both the menat and the sistra as these objects that were used in very much in religious practice. The menat strongly associated with Hathor, the sistra associated with Hathor, but over time has wider connotations, particularly as it's incorporated into the cult of Isis.
That was fantastic, Jo. Thank you so much. Really incredibly informative. There's a couple of questions already in the chat box, but maybe, Jo, if you want to have a little drink, a little rest for a while, Tahya, I can hand over to you.
That will be fantastic.
Demonstration, and then we can have a Q&A.
Yes, that will be super.
Excellent.
I'm looking forward to seeing the sistra in action.
Yeah, I think we all are. So over to you now, Tahya.
Okay, thank you. I'm just changing my view here. So greetings, everyone. My name is Tahya, and it's an Arabic Egyptian name that means greetings or welcome. So I just want to thank Sarah for inviting me to show off the instrument that I designed. And I want to thank Joanne for giving me a few moments to be a part of this lecture series as well. And basically, real quickly, what happened for me is that in 2007, I traveled to Egypt. I had already been a longtime devotee of dances from Egypt and throughout the Middle and Far East, and also play frame drum and finger cymbals. So when I went to Egypt and saw so many depictions of processions that included women playing the sistrum and menat, I came back from my travels in 2007 and I wanted to add that to my percussion ensemble or collection, and all I could find were ones sitting on museum shelves. And so I ended up being inspired to consider whether or not I could facilitate bringing it back into our practice in the 21st century. Because of my study of the frame drum, I was associated with some prominent frame drummers, Glenn Velez among them, and he had associations with the Cooperman Frame Drum Company and the Cooperman Drum Company, I should say. And I reached out to him and asked him if he thought that they might be interested in producing such an instrument. And long story short, after 7 years of dedicated perseverance, I designed an instrument that is now being manufactured and available for you to hold in your hand as well. So this is what it looks like, and these are just my own little amulets here on the side. But I used the instrument that I believe is currently housed in the Louvre that is said to be an instrument played by Hanut Awi, or it is the sistrum of Hanut Awi. So I used the engraving on her instrument as the inspiration to the engraving on my instrument. And I will say that despite the fact that all indications are that the sound of the shimmering sistrum, as Joanne mentioned earlier, was described maybe as a tinkling or the rustling sound of the papyrus. However, in my interpretation, bringing it into the 21st century, after having been in the courtyards at the major temples throughout Egypt, I wanted to imagine myself playing and processing through the courtyard, and so I thought it should have a robust sound. And so this instrument has 16 jingles. So it is quite robust. There's nothing really subtle about the jingling of this instrument, but also I have been, of course, before going into isolation, I was doing programming at outdoor festivals and parks, And so again, I wanted it to have a robust sound. I wanted to draw attention to our processional. So without further ado, I'll give you a little sample of it. I have found that it does not necessarily translate really well over Zoom, so I hope that you get a sweet indication of it, but if it sounds a little staticky, it's probably just because of trying to do this over the internet. So taking verses from Dendera, translating similar to the presentation that Joanne referenced earlier, text from Dendera. We sound our drum for her spirit. We dance her grace. We see her lovely form in the heavens. She is Our Lady of Sistrum. Hathor, Hathor. Lady of delight, mistress of dance, and queen of song, lady of all beauty, mistress of salutation. When both her eyes are open, sun and moon, our hearts rejoice, receiving light. We drum, we dance, we play the sistrum for her. Hathor, Hathor. Thank you. Tahya, Tahya. Please visit me at tahya.com.
Thank you so much. That was lovely. That was a really great addition to our session.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I was thinking perhaps, you know, we looked at that image with the which was from one of the crypts at Dendera, where the ladies have got the sistra, and then they've got the tambra, they've got the drum. So while there might not be much noise from the sistra, they might have had the noise from the drum. So perhaps your sistra, we can think of it as combining both those things, because they would have needed some noise they'd have needed the rhythm for the music and for the dance. But yes, it is beautiful.
The thing they didn't have the tambourine, so I wonder if the sistra and the drum together were a kind of deconstructed tambourine sound.
Well, the Egyptians don't have tambourines, and texts that talk about a tambourine are wrong. It's a tambra. So they just have, like, think of this. They have like a little round drum that they beat, and then they've got the sistra with the jingly noise. So yeah, I think it's the combination of them.
You know, I just want to insert one more thing, if I may. The other thing the thing that I would say that most inspired me about this is that when I read Lane Redmond's book, When the Drummers Were Women, she talked about the temple at Dendera and mentioned the image not only of the 7 Hathors, the several, what is it, 3 of them with drums and 4 with sistrum. The birthing chapel has a depiction of a processional of 32 drummers and 29 priestesses playing sistrum. Mm-hmm. So again, you know, this is what really inspired me about the concept of a robust procession of women playing percussion. So beautiful. And I did get to see that. I found that it actually is like a little molding, if you will, along the floor line of a hallway, but I found it and it was great. Thank you.
Yeah. Gosh, well, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that. It was wonderful to see that the sistra in action after we've contemplated it. I'm just having a look. I'm trying to have a look in chat. Let me see.
We've got the question about whether or not you've written any books about the menat and sistra there.
No, not yet. Sadly, not yet. Yes, Claudia's asking about the pairware. Yes, I was talking about the pairware when I said the chapel behind the naxos. Can I recommend any reading? there's very little that has been written purely on the sistra and the menat. You kind of have to ferret through lots of larger texts. Claudia, do you read French? There's an article in French that is quite old now, but that is written purely about the menat. Hathor, Geraldine Pinch's Votive Offerings to Hathor, which is a wonderful book in its own right. She has a couple of sections in that where she talks about the menat, but other than that, there is very little that's actually written about them as objects that we've tried to look at them as objects that were used in ritual action. I can't think of anything else. There's a PhD that I referenced because I had used Rittner's images, so I didn't think it was fair not to reference her. Sarah is making this recording available to you once it's finished. That PhD, I think, is downloadable. I think it's on a digital catalogue. That does talk a fair amount about the images using the sistra and the menat, but again, you have to wade through it. There isn't very much written directly about the sistra or the menat in its own right yet, but it is something that I would like very much like to address. Did they take the menat from the neck in order to rattle it?
We've got you have some pictures of them holding it round their neck.
Yeah.
As if they were rattling it without actually taking it off.
Yeah, it looks like they do both things. It looks like sometimes they do hold it and use it as a rattle, and then others that they do have it on and they are rattling it. Perhaps wearing it might have been easier if they are in procession. So you have it on and then you're rattling it. But it looks from the images that they do both. So I think the thing to take from it is people talk about the menat necklace. It can be worn, but really it's a ritual instrument. But even that image of Hathor and Seti, she's wearing it and she's just offering it to him.
Can I just add another question?
Yeah, of course.
When you see, because you see pictures also of people playing harps, don't you? Was the harp a part of was that part of a religious? Is that a religious instrument? Was that just?
It is, Peter. But harps. We see harps in funerary. Well, there's two types of images we see of harps. We see standing harps in banquet scenes. And the banquet scenes we see in 18th dynasty tombs. So that they are either a real banquet that your relatives had to celebrate your cult and keep your memory alive, or they are the Egyptians hoping that these things are going to happen. So we see harps in that manner. We also see later, we see a blind harpist, and he is male. And he has a very different role. Interestingly, he is often given quite melancholy texts which talk about how you have to enjoy the here and now, which is quite not necessarily in keeping with the usual the Egyptian sense of how wonderful the afterlife is. But so we do see harps, and harps have survived in museums worldwide, but we tend to see them in funerary cult as opposed to the veneration of the gods.
Sorry, I'm getting voice. My voice is flashed on my microphone somewhere, but presumably harps have been reconstructed. I'm just really curious what they might have sounded like, how many strings they had.
I think there's a variety, because there's standing harps and harps which which are on your shoulder. There are enough that have survived in museums that they have been reconstructed. Off the top of my head, I can't remember how many strings that they have, but that there is enough physical evidence that have survived in museums that they have been. Well, there's physical examples. I'm not actually sure whether examples have been reconstructed, because there are. The British Museum, I think, has an extremely good example.
Jo, I wanted to ask you about those kind of proto-sistrums, those ones that represent Horus at the top.
They're just fantastic.
Yeah, I was wondering whether, you know, we know that the hooped sistrum had the metallic discs in, but do we know what the naos style ones had in?
No, because none of them have survived. There's just the holes, but they assume it's the same. That they assume it's just the same.
Just seems to be they would have been, whatever it was much smaller, because the space in there looks a bit smaller. And I wonder whether, you know, the fact that they kept them going on alongside the hoop style system makes me think that they probably did have quite a different sound as well. The fact that they keep them going on and they refer to them in text, you know, differently. So perhaps different sound, and perhaps closer to that rattling of the papyrus type sound. I was wondering as well whether that element in any way fits in with the story of Horus as the divine child in the swamp. And I know that Hathor's name means the house of Horus, and there seems to be that representation of the womb or the safe space, her symbol incorporated into the sistra handle quite often. That seems to be an enclosure that Horus is safe in.
I mean, both the menat and the sistra, and the concept of the papyrus very much links to the pulling the papyrus for Hathor, and also the birth of Horus in Chemnus, and it can be a variety of goddesses who looked after him there. So we could have either Isis or Hathor protecting him. So again, it's all about protecting Horus and the divine child. It's both those things.
And the paddle doll, look, you've talked about the paddle dolls before when you did pre-dynastic women in pre-dynastic times, and that beautiful symbolism of the genitals and the hair seems to be like a motif that's really ancient and predates dynastic Egypt.
I mean, it's the importance of hair just carries on in ancient Egypt. But the thing with the paddle dolls is because they're an abbreviation, and I always think about them as shorthand. So the Egyptians have shown the most important elements in this. So we don't need a face, we don't need hands, but it's the fertility, you know, it's the pubic region, and hair is very much associated with your gender identity in ancient Egypt. So it's very much about your femininity. It is a motif that we see, you know, throughout time in ancient Egypt, in pharaonic Egypt.
And does the rosette have significance to Hathor as well? Because that seems to be a motif that continues.
Sorry, the what, Sarah?
The rosette, the sort of stylized flower.
Well, it is, but we also see it on statues of Sekhmet, on the nipple. We often see the rosette there as well. I'm not sure whether much scholarship has been done on that, but you know, it is again, it's another motif that we see linking these images.
And one of my thoughts with that wall relief, I can't remember which temple it was, somewhere at Dendera anyway, when you've got the 4 pillars almost of Hathor, and then you've got a giant menat necklace underneath, and you've got the bark on one side. I wondered whether the string of beads represents the sky and the journey of the solar bark through the sky, because the solar bark is sitting on one side of it, and because turquoise was probably revered because of its similarity in color to the sky as well. And Hathor was the mistress of the sky as well as the mistress.
Yeah. So she's mistress of the sky. I mean, to be fair, many deities are mistress of the sky, mistress of heavens, but she's this mistress of Mefka, which is this turquoise, and the color, it's either the color or the stone, but I think it's the color, because it's sometimes used in places where it's actually copper that's mined, not turquoise. So I think it's the colour. So she's associated with that beautiful colour, and that bluey green colour is the colour of rebirth and rejuvenation. But the faience just lends itself to that tinkering noise. So yeah, it is. All these things are very much linked, and that's why we see the menat and the sistra time and time again together in these religious practice.
So another point that I wanted to ask as well, actually, about, I've always felt that the sound of the sistra, especially given a lot of the bars take on this serpent form, mimics the sound of a snake hissing.
Well, that's a very good point. It might too, yeah, I like that. And to the Egyptians, serpents are incredibly powerful creatures, because they see them very much associated with rebirth because of the shedding of the skins. So if it does link in with the serpent, that would be very that would be very keeping. And
then when the serpent returns, once it's been sent out into the abyss to seek out Tefnut and Shu and Tefnut, it returns and becomes the Uraeus as well. So it has that protective.
And we see that the Uraeus on many of the sistra, on the naxos, and then on some of the hoop sistra, we saw them on the sides as well. And on the later period ones, when we start to get many deities incorporated, we often have the sistra. We often have the Uraeus.
Vicky asks, in the same scene that I was just talking about, whether you've got the 4 columns of Hathor becoming the menat, could the pouring of the beads above or the seeds above represent the seed of Set, maybe?
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, I mean, somebody, I think Arthur asked something about phallic images earlier, and yes, there is suggestions that the menat is associated with the testicles of Seth, and the beads are the seeds of Seth. So that's having the menat in this protective capacity. I mean, the shape of the menat is really very distinctive. I mean, in a practical term, all the counterpose needs to do is to act as a weight, so that the necklace doesn't fall forward. But it's created in such an elaborate and decorative manner that it's clearly meaningful. It doesn't have to be that shape. It could be anything. It's just the weight that's important.
Could that symbol be actually a marrying of male and female genitalia? Because the overall shape is male genitalia, and yet female genitalia is like illustrated over top of it.
Well, it's very funny that you should say that. I did a version of this as part of a lecture series, and that was in our discussion. That was what many of the attendees came to the conclusion, that it was representing both male and female, which would be very much in keeping if we're thinking about the menat as radiating life. That image where we see Sekhmet and it's got the ankh symbol, the Egyptians could not make it any clearer that this object is life-giving.
And those images also have a sexual connotation when you see them between kings and queens as well.
Yeah.
Claudia asked, what about the shape of the counterpoise worn by Ptah?
I'm not sure it's necessarily particularly linked to the material that we've been looking at today. I haven't really looked at it in comparison, because I wanted to look at the menat and the sistra as a pair, so to speak.
I mean, we haven't spoken about it very much, and as you said, it could take up a whole nother session, but could you describe the clappers and how they might have been incorporated into processional music and what they were usually made out of?
Well, the clappers are very often, well, we've got some beautiful ivory examples, and many of them are indeed Hathor headed, or they have little hands on them. There are some beautiful examples which have dots all over them, and if we think that one of the mummies that was found at Montuhotep's temple, she was covered in small dots, and she was small dot tattoos. She was a priestess of Hathor. Her coffin names her as a priestess of Hathor. So the clappers that have the little dots, which could be tattoos, do indeed suggest that you know, we're seeing these as the hands of the priestesses. There's also, we need to think of the concept of Hathor as being described as the hand of the god. In some texts, Hathor really is seen to have this regenerate, well, very much being linked to Atum. Is a creator god, and he creates his children in his own right. But in later references, we have the concept of the hand of the goddess, the hand of the god, and Hathor is seen to invigorate Atum so he can create his own children. So it's the concept that she's not the sexual partner of Atum, but she brings about this fertility. In the same way, if we think that we have the mummy of Osiris, and Isis invigorates him so that she can conceive Horus. So women are seen to sort of be able to bring about fertility. That they're heralders of this. So clappers are also found in multiples. So again, they have a similar type of context to the paddle dolls. And if we think that the paddle dolls may possibly be representing a dance troupe, and then we have clappers found in multiples. But it would be, again, it's the percussion, it's the beating of the rhythm.
I was wondering as well about cattle, and whether or not cattle would have worn menats, or, you know, the way that cattle often wear bells in other countries. And often you see Indian bulls and cows decorated with beautiful necklaces. So I wondered whether that might have been something something similar might have happened with the divinization of cattle in ancient Egypt.
I'm not really sure that there's any evidence that cattle themselves were considered as deities. There is evidence of Hathor statues as a cow, not just the one that we saw. That there is likely that there was earlier statues at Deir el-Bahari of Hathor in cow form, and nearly all the representations show the statue wearing a menat. But I'm not aware that there was actually any cattle kept, and not like if we're thinking about the Apis bull at a later time period.
Like a female version of the Apis.
No. The Apis's mother is venerated, but she's only venerated as the mother of the Apis. So there isn't any evidence that cattle were venerated in the same way.
Okay. Right. Oh, and one other thing I was going to ask is, with regards to the counterpoise as an amulet, was there a specific part on a body where that would have been placed in death, for example, to give some hint of what power?
There's no. Often the Book of the Dead tells us where amulets should be placed, and it's incredibly useful. It tells us what colour and where they should be placed, but there isn't anything which talks about the menat amulet and the counterpose amulet. Sadly, I'm not aware of any that have been found in situ, or any that have been x-rayed now. So unfortunately, not.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions? I've asked loads now, so please do. Oh, hang on. Tahya, do you want to ask your question yourself there?
Okay, now I have to go back to the chat and read it. Yeah, so I was wondering, thinking about the snake rods on the sistrum. I thought that Hathor was also known as a snake goddess, and therefore the representation of the rods in the shape of a snake had to do with her being a snake goddess. And so it's making me think that if the whole concept of the snake shedding its skin and having regenerative powers and being a representation of birth and rebirth, if that also was the whole connection with Hathor.
Claudia has put in the chat Meret Warehead, and there's there is a snake goddess who we can think of really as great of magic. Oh, we've got the echo back. The golden shrine that I talked about found in the tomb of Tutankhamun, that has a representation of the snake goddess wrapped in beads, and the king is suckling. It isn't necessarily associated with Hathor. If we translate the name, it just means great of magic. Isis, of course, at later time periods does take serpent form, but not necessarily Hathor.
And I'm not trying to dispute that. I get that. I'm just curious did we already talk about this? Why so many sistrum have the rods depicted in the shape of a snake? You know, like there's a little bit of a head and then it goes through and then there's a tail. They could
be the uraei. What we have in some, I'm thinking in the New Kingdom, we can think of them as uraei goddesses, and that it can be Isis, Nephthys, Neith, or Selkat. Any of those are referred to as uraei goddesses, and they are in the afterlife, that they protect the king. Think of them as fire and spitting, and that they are there as protection. So the serpent isn't necessarily linked to any of them. I mean, there are other serpent goddesses. Merit Saga and Reminiscent are often in serpent form, but Merit Saga is very much localized to Deir al-Medina. So Merit Saga is not going to be depicted on the sistra, and I don't think Reminiscent is. It's more likely that it's a uraei as a protector. The problem with saying it's the uraei goddesses is that they do tend to be associated with the afterlife. And our images of the sistra, we see them, we do see them in afterlife, we see them in tomb scenes, but in later time periods, we of course see them in temples as part of procession and as part of worship. So I would be reluctant to say that they are uraei goddesses without any kind of textual reference. I mean, the thing with the gods, and this is the way I always think about it, is the gods can take many forms. So think of a jar, and the essence of the god is poured into the jar, and that jar can be multiple forms, but the god stays the same. It's just that its manifestation changes. And the Egyptians have absolutely no issues and no problems with this. And in that jar, you can even pour two gods. So you can have the synchronization, and then that becomes a new deity. I don't think of it as merging, because we've still got the original two deities. We've then got a new deity. So when we see these images incorporating different manifestations, it is difficult to unpick and know for sure unless we've got any text, who is actually being depicted.
I don't know if you're looking at the chat, Joe, but Claudia asks that at Dendera there are depictions of a cobra with the head of a lioness and cow horns.
Well, that would be in keeping with exactly what we're talking about, these different manifestations. There's a wonderful statue in the Louvre which has Hathor in her cow form. Then we have Hathor as a human. Then we have a female with the head of a lion. So the whole statue has about 3, if not 4, different manifestations of her, and that's exactly the same as that. The menat, the counterpose that we looked at, that had Hathor as a cow in the womb section, and then we had Hathor as a female in the body of the counterpose. A lion, if we have Sekhmet, Tefnut. Lions are commonly used for female deities and Mut. And they are seen very much as protectors, particularly protectors of the king.
Okay, excellent. Does anyone else have any other questions? While you're thinking of any last questions, I'll just tell everyone that our next session, thank you very much to you, Joe, by the way, that was absolutely brilliant. And you, Tahya, I loved that. It was so interesting. It was much more sort of far-reaching than I anticipated. And our next session is with Dr. Luigi Prada, who's at the University of Uppsala, but he's an Italian Egyptologist who was working at the University of Oxford for quite a while. And if you came to our last session with him, he talked about ancient Egyptian dream interpretation because that's his specialist area. And he's going to be talking on the 11th of December at the same time about different forms of divination. So we're going to be looking at hydromancy, so water divination, lecanomancy, which is divination using water in bowls with bits of oil in, things like bird omens, celestial omina, all these kinds of things. It's going to be a really fascinating session. So do try and join us for that one if you can. But if you don't have any more questions, Joe, thank you so much. That was really excellent. Really enjoyed it. And I'll be sending the recording of this out to everybody tomorrow morning. So keep your eyes peeled for that and you can watch it again at your leisure.
Thank you all for joining me. All right then, folks. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Joe. See you later.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.